Welcome and thank you, Mr. Ovbiagele, for joining us today. It's an honor to have you. You've done something actually which is so needed for organizations like us, which is visually representing what is happening on ground in Nigeria. Now, The Milkmaid is the official submission of Nigeria for the Best International Feature Film category at the 93rd Academy Awards in 2021 this year. Now, for many may not know, that is essentially the Oscars. So congratulations to you for that and to the team as well. Many of us may not be familiar with the storyline, so it'll be good if you could just give us a sort of short version of what The Milkmaid is about for those who are unfamiliar.
Well, The Milkmaid is a story set in rural sub-Saharan Africa. And it essentially seeks to follow the lives of two young women, sisters, the older sister Aisha, the younger sister Zainab, who essentially are Fulani milkmaids. And they're essentially living their lives in their village, going about their daily business, their occupation. The younger sister is getting married. But in the process of getting married, actually at the wedding reception, the village is attacked by a band of insurgents. Carnage ensues, and the girls are abducted along with a number of other women from the village and taken away to the hideout of the insurgents, where they undergo the typical processes of brainwashing and indoctrination. Essentially, a new way of life and philosophy is imposed on them, which is foreign to what they are accustomed to. So the film essentially seeks to explore how these two sisters adjust or do not adjust to this new way of life that's imposed on them, and how that affects their relationships, primarily between each other and as well, between themselves and the wider society.
I mean, that's fantastic. That's a really real life representation of what goes on. I think often when we talk about the calamities that are happening, especially within the northern Nigeria and mid-belt Nigeria, it can be very easy to forget that these are human lives, and also they are children essentially. So that's why for us this is a gift. It's golden for us to be able to have this to share with people. So Nigeria has been battling this insurgency for over a decade now, but this appears to be the first time the complexity of the insurgency in northern Nigeria has been given such a platform on the international stage. I'd say probably post Bring Back Our Girls campaign, when the Chibok girls were abducted. So when you were making the movie, did you believe it would garner so much attention? And was this your intention to bring to light what is going on in the north, or was it more a work of art?
Well, hopefully we try to tick both boxes. I mean, it's not a documentary. It's not an educational vehicle, so to speak. It still has to stand on its own as entertainment of a certain sort, or perhaps edutainment. Because certainly a very strong, component of our mission, was to reawaken the attention of the world to the plight of the victims. I mean, around the time that I started to put together this story, sort of getting the sense personally that the post 2014 and the abduction of the Chibok girls, post the global attention, sort of spearheaded by Michelle Obama, tweeting, and celebrities essentially following that lead. The air seemed to have seeped out of the cause of the victims of insurgency, and it was no longer front burner. Certainly in Nigeria, a lot more events and incidents had sort of overtaken that, and it seemed to be pushed very much to the periphery of consciousness of the nation. And the situation wasn't going away. One, the carnage was still going on. The victims were still multiplying. Increasingly being displaced from their villages and towns and living in internally displaced people's camps around the country, with very little succor being brought to them. No rehabilitation, no reintegration, no support, material or otherwise. So I felt, as a filmmaker, we do have these tools at our disposal, to sort of be a voice, to those who can't speak for themselves. And that was certainly very much on my mind, to certainly bring attention and spotlight, to the experiences of the people most affected by the insurgency situation.
Absolutely. Okay, and for us, this week we are highlighting the fact that over 100 of the Chibok girls are still missing. So kind of similar to what you're saying, almost reminding people that there are schoolgirls that are still missing and are still in captivity. Leah Sharibu is one of over 100 schoolgirls that were kidnapped 3 years ago. And she, they were all released. 5 died on their way to captivity. But Leah Sharibu is still being held 3 years on. It's her 18th birthday. She's turning 18 this year. We're also highlighting the fact that the insecurity crisis has gotten so bad that 333 schoolboys were just easily abducted from Kankara in the president's own state whilst he was still in residence. These are all very shocking, but yet they are very, very real. They are very, very real. What advice would you give to NGOs and like ourselves, International Organization for Peace and Social Justice, that are trying to almost, I'd say, sensitize and awaken, especially Nigerians in the diaspora and their friends, to the plight, the very real suffering of children, men and women in Nigeria?
I mean, first of all, I must commend, your NGO, your organization, because this interview in itself is the sort of advice I'll give to other NGOs. This is a very, very important step, looking for tools, looking for content that can be used as a platform, to create that awareness, to reawaken that consciousness. It is extremely important. We just need to keep on banging the drum and not to relent. Unfortunately, where we live in Nigeria and perhaps to varying extents in other African countries, these sort of incidences tend to be taken in the stride and people go about their daily lives. The honest truth is that as a nation, certainly, for our nation, we cannot make sustainable progress if these issues are not comprehensively addressed. You can't sweep them under the carpet and think that we can build a strong and virile nation economically and socially. With these things going on in our backyard, we simply cannot.
Absolutely, and this is one of the things that we're saying here at PSJ UK as well. It is vital, it's instrumental to the development of the nation. So it is beneficial that everyone pays attention for the future and the betterment of Nigeria. But obviously, your background, I've done a bit of Googling, your background is different from the characters that are being portrayed in The Milkmaid. How did you authentically ensure you captured the experiences of the characters? And were there any challenges you faced with doing this?
Well, as you correctly point out, my background is somewhat different, from the characters portrayed in The Milkmaid, and that necessitated on my part needing to immerse myself in the world of these characters, the setting of the story that I wanted to tell, and needing to do a lot of extensive research, which took me about a month or so, but really extensive reading. It was striking to me when I tried to reach out to a local NGO in Nigeria that I was aware had done some work with victims of insurgency. I was just trying to glean some insights from their work. And I was surprised, when I reached out to this NGO in Lagos, where I'm also based, and the NGO said, hey, we don't need to tell you. We can actually take you to a camp in Lagos where you can actually meet some of these victims. And that was shocking to me because I was living in Lekki. I had no idea there was any sort of settlement of, insurgency victims in Lagos. Certainly you knew it was taking place in the north, but had no idea. Literally across the road from where I live, there was a settlement of victims of insurgency who had escaped from the insurgency situation in the north had made their way down to the south on the back of trucks and were essentially renting patches of ground from area boys in Lagos State, where they were erecting very ramshackle booths under which they were taking shelter from storm and sun, and trying to recover the pieces of their lives. Totally undocumented, totally unreported by the local media. And that just points to what's going on in the country, that they could actually be resident among us, so close to us, and no one, their situation was entirely unreported. Up to now, I haven't seen any news article talking about that settlement in Lagos. So that was very, very shocking to me that could be there. I spoke to a couple of the women, and part of what I gleaned from them, apart from information, just perception of who they were, and we tried to infuse into the story of the milkmaid, was the resilience of these women, having gone through these atrocities and horrors of loved ones being killed, but still standing on their own 2 feet, still trying to move forward as best they could with zero support, obviously. But that was it. So having gotten some insights from that encounter with these victims, and then supplemented by a lot of information, reading reports, reading the accounts of survivors of the insurgency, that helped to sort of ground me in the setting of the story that I wanted to tell.
Wow, that's shocking, and I suspect that many viewers have been surprised by some of the scenes and the realities that have been exposed through the milkmaid. What would you say was the biggest thing that actually, when you heard feedback from viewers, they were often quite either confused, surprised, or just very disturbed by within the portrayal of the milkmaid?
I think so. I think obviously they were moved by the scenes and scenarios which the film depicted in terms of what happened to the girls. I think they were also a little surprised that if some of the insurgents didn't quite seem as black and white as they thought they would be. I think they were expecting to see monsters, committing these atrocities, but realizing that, and Milkmaid does try to touch on that there's not that thick a line between the insurgents and the victims, because the insurgents weren't born insurgents. A lot of them started out as victims who themselves were abducted from their villages, particularly for the men, and then having been taken into captivity, were now brainwashed and indoctrinated to now start, performing these acts of extremism, which they didn't grow up with, and that is something that certainly needs to be taken on board in terms of finding a lasting solution to this thing, which is how has this ideology been able to be persuasive and seductive, to people who didn't grow up with this mindset. So that's something that definitely needs to be looked into and factored into any conversations that are directed towards resolving the situation.
Yeah, so you really focus on the nuances around this, the conflicts and the insurgency in the north, and often I think these things go ignored. Things are often painted quite black and white, especially in the media, I think. What advice can you give to NGOs or PSJ UK or anyone listening? How can we go about tackling those nuances? What would you, just from your sort of your human interaction with some of the victims, and also, I guess, engrossing yourself in these characters, including the characters of the insurgents, what's one or two advice that you can give us or give people listening that we should consider, or perhaps even try to explore, that could help now reverse some of these ideologies or the extent of this radicalization that's occurring in these areas?
I think certainly one of the gaps that I see that I think would be helpful, would be certainly, the Nigerian army has had some measure of success in terms of not just countering some of the attacks, but actually having beneficiaries of some repentance insurgents who have, either through abduction by the army or of their own volition have essentially just surrendered, And I think there's nowhere near enough attention having been directed towards actually incorporating these repentant insurgents into a reach out effort, essentially using them almost as, poster people, for a new way of thinking, a new way of looking. I was like you before. This is how I am now. I've now realized that, what we were taught, you just don't see that. You don't see any prominent faces among people who were in that situation, have come out of it and are saying that, this thing is bad. We don't need to do it this way. And even so, whether it's, these repentant people speaking in some shape or form back to their former colleagues, or even just speaking to NGOs or the government themselves and saying, look, this is where these people are coming from. This is what you guys need to do, to ensure that, this ideology is not as persuasive and convincing as it was to me when I got caught in that situation. You simply don't have, that profile and that, prominence of people to actually talk against, this ideology, both for ex-insurgents as well as the victims as well. They just seem to be so anonymous. There's no prominence being given to them. And I think that's where the NGOs have an opportunity if the government, is unable or, perhaps disinclined to go down that route. Certainly, the NGOs do have an opportunity to incorporate, some of these people who have been directly involved in the crisis, into the effort.
No, absolutely. Thank you for sharing those advice. So many people watching have careers, they have businesses and hobbies that are quite far removed from the realities of what some of the victims depicted in the Milkmaids are going through and suffering. How did you manage to so strongly engage in this story to the extent that you've invested, time, energy, and all efforts into producing this story? What made you connect to it so strongly?
I think, I won't say anything that is quite as facile of love of country or love of human being. I like to think I love my country. I like to think I have some degree of love for my fellow human beings. But I guess it was just a passion and a sense of outrage, really, that this was still going on. And again, unfortunately, having lived in this country for so many years, again, it just seemed to be another, aspect of another anomaly that we all sort of put under our belt and chose to go our merry way. And I just sense that this couldn't continue. It just didn't make sense. I mean, I saw, prior to writing the story, I saw the picture of the young woman, published in the media, actually her body without a head. And the picture was taken just moments after she had detonated her suicide vest, killing herself and several others. And the question was, what would make this young woman, who clearly must have had a different idea for her life when she was growing up, what would make her end up like this? We didn't grow up with this phenomenon in the country. I mean, the country obviously is still a developing country, but this was not there. How did this come into the country? How did this come into our society? These are people who should still be alive, and they are gone, not just gone, taking other lives with them. And no one thinks this is sufficiently important to stop what you're doing, whatever business or job you have, to take a moment to pause and say, this is not right. Not only is it not right, we have to do something to ensure it stops. And so I guess maybe it was just a product of that passion that made me address and devote as much as I had resource-wise to realize it.
And I'm sure many people watching right now can relate. I know certainly the volunteers at PSJ UK can absolutely relate to the feeling and the sense that you've just described there. Now, in 2020, PSJ UK, we focused on a campaign, and this will probably be our last question. We focused on a campaign called Silent Slaughter. And essentially, the campaign was highlighting the fact that many are being slaughtered in Nigeria, and there's just absolutely no attention, in particularly in the international, in the international stage. There's violence, killings, and kidnappings across Mudbelt and northern Nigeria, and it's often not spoken about. You just described that you saw an image, and that image got you to ask so many questions. And an image is a still shot. I can only imagine the impact that anyone who has watched the film and who will watch the film, the impact that will have in sort of fostering those feelings that you described as well. So how important would you say the film industry is in actually influencing influencing people to go on this journey to better in Nigeria? And what sort of support would you say is required, is needed, that actually the industry has not got right now?
Well, certainly, the film industry has an extremely important and vital role that it could play if it wanted to, for situations of this sort. We know certainly abroad and in Hollywood, numerous films have been done on the World War II, the Holocaust, very powerful, influential films which have been able to garner awards, and in the process of garnering those awards, have been able to bring those issues to the forefront of consciousness of the global society. And that's deliberate. And it's done deliberately to ensure that what happened, it can't remedy the situation, but to ensure it never happens again. And these films are still being made. How many years later? We're talking about literally about 80 years later, these films are still being made. Just by the fact that situation, as certainly the core of that situation, of that discrimination, has, very largely ended. But notwithstanding, they still feel that weight of responsibility to ensure that if we take our hands off the steering wheel, the vehicle can easily gravitate and veer back towards that. So to ensure that, look, we need to keep on bringing what happened, as a reminder that this happened and this should never happen again. Now, we are still in this situation, in Africa, in Nigeria, and nowhere near enough films or thematic content in the film industry have been made about this situation. So, there's such a gap between what is needed and what is currently being supplied. And, a lot can and should and needs to be given to the film industry, certainly in terms of encouragement, financially, technically. Filmmakers also business people. You need to make, particularly for Nollywood, where you don't have a structured, financing mechanism that gets these films made. People have to make these things like we did on our own steam, basically. You don't have any grants. Maybe you do have some level of commercial facilities for industries like Bank of Industry, but a whole lot more is needed. There's only so much that particular institution can do. So there's so much more support that needs to go into encouraging filmmakers to go down this path of telling stories, that speak to critical issues in our society, as opposed to gravitating towards much more commercially safe content like comedies and rom-coms and all those things that, help people to escape, from this situation that's going on right in their backyard.
Absolutely. And often actually these sort of true stories that are hard to grasp and also hard to swallow when it's, it's revealing almost like an underground truth of a part of your identity. If you are a Nigerian, often they do very well as well. So it's great that you decided to go down this road. Thank you, Mr. Desmond Ovbiagele. We appreciate your work and you and your team and your efforts. We describe it as a gift because we understand the power of the visual. We understand the power of visualizing this for audiences to really understand the reality of what our fellow brothers and sisters are going through. And I sort of hope and pray that you will go very, very far with your journey with the Academy Awards this year, and do keep us updated. We will definitely be supporting you from the background and cheering you and the team on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.